I would call to order the Village of Westmont Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for January 9th, 2013. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Thomas?
Here.
Commissioner Pill?
Here.
Commissioner Anton?
Here.
Commissioner Fidesco?
Here.
Commissioner Fleet? Commissioner Van Buren is here, and Chairman Richard.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. If you would please all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. While I have you all standing, please, anybody that's going to give any testimony for or against, anybody that's going to speak tonight, you got to be sworn in. So if you please raise your hands. I swear that any testimony I give this evening shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do.
There are some people, I can't keep track of you all, so I will ask you if you swore an oath before you come to speak. Okay. I would also ask that you silence all and any electronic devices, if you would, please. First item on our agenda is the minutes of our last meeting, and I understand they are not ready yet,
That's
correct? Okay, so, John, a motion to pass that till next?
Motion to postpone until next meeting.
Motion to postpone.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pill, seconded by Commissioner Anton. Question on the motion? A roll call, please.
Commissioner Pill?
Yes.
Commissioner Anton?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Buren votes yes. Commissioner Fidesco?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
And Chairman Richard.
Yes. Okay, first item on our agenda is the presenting of the comprehensive plan for a public hearing. If, who is going to present? Oh, I'm sorry, Shannon, if you would.
That's okay. Thank you, Chairman Richard. This evening represents the culmination of more than a year and a half of hard work on the part of our community, our village staff, and our business members. And we're very pleased to present Halcyon Levine, who has guided our comprehensive plan process through this. Numerous community outreach incidences have occurred with community workshops taking place October 4th, 2011, key person interviews with 10 individuals throughout the community taking place in fall of 2011, a business workshop taking place around September 29th of that year, and then approximately 1 year ago this month, many of you will remember that we had a very cold and chilly winter evening over at the Park District facility where we had our community visioning workshop. We had great turnout for that. The comprehensive plan, and Halcyon Levine will explain more background, but this is the community's opportunity to take a pulse of what the community vision is for a 10 to 15 and sometimes 20-year time frame. We're very pleased that so many people have turned out for the community workshops. We're extremely excited that so many people showed up this evening for our open house to look at the plans in more depth. I do want to take a moment to thank our steering committee who over a series of 5 meetings have participated in reviewing the draft documents, providing feedback, and so forth. Those members are Greg Pill, who happens to be a member of our Planning and Zoning Commission, Mark Forsley, Larry Forsberg, Bob Scott, Kim Heller, Chester Gottwald, Don Boringer, Violet Hawkins, Jack Todd, who I believe is in the audience this evening, and Mike Frigo. So I just wanted to say thank you to those that have participated in that group. That was a cross-section of residents, business owners, staff and elected officials, and other folks from nonprofit agencies. And also thank you to each of you for kind of guiding our feedback process and helping us make this truly a community plan and a community vision. With that, I would like to invite John Halcyon and Doug Hamill to the podium from Halcyon Levine to guide us through in more depth what we've been experiencing over the last 18 months or so.
All right, thanks, Shannon. Mr. Chairman and members of the Plan Commission, thanks so much for having us here this evening to present the draft comprehensive plan to the village for consideration. I apologize to everybody in the room with my back being toward them. And we're going to work off the monitors you'll see on the screen there. I think you've all probably seen a copy of the document. It looks like this. It's been on the village's website for review for quite some time. We got a lot of feedback on it. And I guess I can't stress enough the advisory committee, the steering committee that was formed by the village to help shepherd this through over the last year-plus effort. They went through line by line, graphic by graphic, idea by idea, came prepared to the meetings, and we really were able to tear through this document and dissect it and rebuild it back up based on their comments and feedback. And it really was a broad spectrum of community support, from business owners to residents at large to not-for-profits to staff to board and commission representation. But we tried to make sure that the advisory committee was a cross-representation, a sounding board, if you will, of the entire Westmont community. So we didn't have one perspective, but every time we met, we had several perspectives reviewing and discussing every aspect of this book. So I really appreciate the work and sacrifice and dedication they put forth over the last year. What we're going to do this evening, since this is the public hearing, it's about a 182-page document, so I'm not going to read through the whole thing for you. Try to get you out of here before midnight. We're going to provide a fairly brief overview of it, 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more, something like that, and we'll go through it pretty quickly. What I'd like to do is sort of get it all out there on the record, and we can go back and revisit any aspect of it. I think I heard a request that we go through it chapter by chapter, and at the end of this, a couple-minute presentation of that chapter, we open it up to any questions pertaining to that chapter from the Planning Commission. And then, if the chairman likes to, we can open up to questions from the floor for that chapter.
Yes.
And we'll handle it chapter by chapter and go through this. I think that's the best way. But our initial review will be pretty quickly to get it introduced into evidence, and then we can answer Q&A as we go through it. So with that, I'm going to go through the document here and see if I can do okay. The first thing that we're going to go through is the table. Let me just back up for real quick here. Let me talk about what a comprehensive plan is and what it is not, for those of you who may be in the audience who may not know. This is not zoning. It is not regulatory. It does not dictate what you can and cannot do with your piece of property, how tall a building has to be, how many parking spaces you have to provide, how far setback your building has to be from the property line. It's not zoning. A comprehensive plan is, if you will, a foundation for decision-making. When the elected officials, when this group, when staff meets with developers, when someone is thinking about moving a business into town, they can all go to this document and see what the intended development, land use, and infrastructure is going to be for this community. They have a sense of what the character of Cass Avenue will be at different locations along the corridor. They will be able to read this and see what the village's intent is with the 63rd Avenue area and what we envision it to be in the future, not what it is now. But this articulates a character, a vision for the community. It puts in place policies, goals, objectives, things that we would like to aspire for the different areas of the community and division. And with this, the village then has a foundation to make zoning amendments, to comment on proposed development, to organize different priorities in its capital improvement planning or its budgeting on an annual basis. This is a policy document. It is a foundation for decision making. It is a roadmap, if you will, for things that may come up over the next decade plus. But it is not regulatory. It is not meant to be that type of a document. It is not a TIF document or anything like that. So it is a comprehensive plan. So real quickly, the table of contents, and I'm going to, you can look on the screen there. I'm going to look with my enhanced peepers here so I can read what's going on. It's divided into the following sections, and we'll go over all those this evening. Introduction, community outreach, vision, goals and objectives, land use plan, residential areas plan, commercial areas plan, which are part of the land use plan. Sub-area plans, Doug Hamill from our office, who worked a lot on this document with myself and Devin Levine, will be going through the different sub-areas. There are 4 of them for the village. Community facilities plan, parks, open space, and environmental features. Transportation and mobility, implementation. We won't be going through the appendix. The appendix is a lot of the background data that was gathered as part of the planning process, but we won't go through that as a presentation this evening. So those are the different chapters that are part of the plan. The introduction, the first chapter of the plan, we don't have the introduction. The introduction really provides a community profile, a snapshot of Westmont right now. It talks about the setting of the community within the region and provides some of the demographic information about what the type of community Westmont is for someone who may be looking to locate a business here or move here, a resident who doesn't know the community as well as maybe they would like to. And it gives them a place to understand the context. It gives the history of Westmont and some demographic trends based on the research contained in the appendix. It explains what the purpose is of the comprehensive plan, what a comprehensive plan is. It talks about how the comprehensive plan is intended to be used by the village as a way to guide its decision-making, its discussion. It describes the planning process that Shannon described. It talked about the steering committee, the workshops, the visioning charrettes, the interviews, the different things that we did to develop the plan over time. And then it provides the organization of the report itself. There's several different chapters. There's 12 chapters in total that comprise the comprehensive plan. So that is what is in the introduction. So if there's any questions or comments on the introduction, that's chapter 1. Before we go to chapter 2, I'll turn it over to Mr. Chairman to see if there's any comments or questions. Very
Does anybody
straightforward.
from the public wish to speak on chapter 1, the introduction? If not, we'll close the public comment on chapter 1. Any commissioners? Okay, please,
All right.
proceed.
Chapter number 2 is community outreach. And oftentimes, this isn't a chapter in a comprehensive plan. We feel as though it's very important. We went to great lengths when we interviewed to assist the village with this job. And we really pride ourselves on creating a broad net of community outreach and participation. We had face-to-face, one-on-one, small group, large group, a number of different interactive tools that we used online through a project website that we developed that was linked to the village's homepage. And so we like to include a chapter in here which highlights all the community outreach that was undertaken. And the reason being, what if somebody comes to the table a year or two from now and says, boy, what were people saying back when this plan was developed? Boy, I moved here. This plan was done 5 years ago. What were they talking about back then? They held a community workshop. What did people identify as being most important to them? What about the business community? We held a workshop with just business owners and managers, not residents in general, but businesses, and said, what is most important to you? So Chapter 2, Community Outreach, contains a summary of all of those activities, all of the workshops, all of the interviews, all the charrettes, all the online interactive surveys, the online mapping tool. The results of all those outreach engagement forums is contained in Chapter 2. So I won't review all of that. It's not a chapter that contains any recommendations or policies. It simply states for the record in a very transparent format, here's everything we did to collect feedback, and here's what the community told us was most important to them. A couple of things that jumped out when we asked people online what was most, what they liked most about it. The parks, the recreation, they really liked that a lot. They liked the fact that the community had a small town feel and they knew the neighbors, and they liked that. They liked the regional location of the community with regard to Chicago and other destinations within the region. Things they thought were challenging. It didn't have the identity or sense of character that they would like to have. They thought that downtown could use some revitalization. They saw that 60-30 in Cass was not realizing the potential that it could be down there because it was a sort of a no man's land. But this chapter identifies those things that are most important. It identifies the summary feedback from the website, the questionnaires, the community issues mapping tool, project initiation workshop, community workshop, do-it-yourself kits, key person interviews, and business outreach. The community questionnaires, I'll just go over a couple of things on here. The community questionnaires online, again, we talked about what was most important. Some interesting statistics. 18% of residents have lived here less than 5 years. Nearly 20% of your residents. That's a big number. We thought that was pretty impressive. But there's also a pretty large number of people who have lived here more than 15 years, almost 50%. So you've got people that have lived here a long, long time, but close to 20% have just recently moved here. That's a dynamic we typically don't see, which means it's a place people want to stay, but it's also got the assets and advantages people are moving and gravitating toward. Those are two nice numbers. We didn't really know what we would see. Things they like to see the best, 55% parks and recreation, followed next by location and proximity to Chicago, access to regional transportation, and small town feel and character with friendly neighbors. Those were the top 5 things we heard when we asked people. We also did an online community mapping technique. I don't know, did anybody in the room do the online mapping? Anybody? Okay. Show of hands, anybody? Yes. Handful of people. We had 28 maps were created, and it generated 239 points of interest. People could go from home, go on their computers and go into an interactive mapping tool that we developed, sort of like Google Maps, and they could say, this is a problematic intersection. This is a dangerous place to cross as a pedestrian. This is a site we desperately need to be redeveloped. But there were a number of different categories: community asset, development priorities, problematic intersections, public safety concerns, undesirable uses, key transit destinations, desired uses or development, poor appearance, or other. So through this mechanism, just online, we had 240 points of interest, things that people said they wanted to see addressed. And it was pretty compelling. And that is all summarized in here. And I won't go through all the detail of that. The project initiation meeting, the same thing. We asked people 4 questions every time we met with them. What do you think are the 5 issues facing this community that we need to know about right now? They identified those 5 as a group, talked about them. And we said, okay, we've talked about them for an hour. Out of everything you've heard, list the 3 most important in order of importance. So we got people to begin to identify issues and as a group prioritize those issues. We then said, if you could undertake 3 projects, what would you start doing right now? And the last question was, what do you like best about living here? What is best about this community? So it gave us a broad sampling of what was most important to the community. So again, so we have time to move on. This chapter goes through the community workshops, the project initiation, the online surveys, the online mapping tool, the key person interviews, and the business community outreach. And all that is contained in Chapter 2 as a summary of everything everybody said. Doesn't contain any recommendations, but clearly puts out there what residents and business owners thought was most important. So that's what's contained in Chapter 2.
Again, will anybody from the public speak on Chapter 2? If not, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? Okay, please proceed.
Okay.
Chapter 3, if you would.
Chapter 3 is the vision statement, and I'm not going to read this. It's several pages long. And unlike a mission statement or a vision statement for like a ball bearing factory, to produce the best ball bearings in the world, well, that's a great mission statement, pretty straightforward. The way we approach vision statements or mission statements for communities is, what is our vision for our residential neighborhoods? What is our vision for village services to residents? What's our vision for Ogden Avenue, for Cass, for 63rd? What's our vision for these different commercial districts? What's the vision for parks and recreation or environmental features? The several pages contained in Chapter 3, and I won't read it because it's something you have to go through and read by yourself, creates a vision for all of these things, and it does so in a retrospective fashion. The vision statement, starting on page 25, Chapter 3, is written as if it's 15 years in the future. And the vision articulates what Westmont is like 15 years from now. And it's written in a retrospective, so people can get a sense of what the character is, the vision of the community realized 15 years from now, if the comprehensive plan is implemented. So that is what is contained in Chapter 3. It's a vision statement. It's several pages long. The vision addresses residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, village services, environmental features, parks and recreation, economic development, infrastructure, so on, so on, and so on. But I'm not going to read it. Like I said, it's about 4 pages long, and it's a narrative. It's a vision statement articulating the desired character of the village 15 years into the future.
Will anybody from the public speak on what they wish the village to be in the next 15 years? Seeing nothing, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? Okay, please proceed.
And again, I know we're going quick, but these are things that you can't have read to you, you have to read. Chapter 4 are goals and objectives, and there's a linearness, if you will, to the process of creating a plan. And the idea is to be as transparent as possible, talk to as many people as possible. So this isn't the Plan Commission's plan. It isn't the Village Board's plan. It isn't a House Levine plan. It's the plan of this community. The residents and business owners of this community articulate this. Based on all of the outreach and based on all the vision, we created detailed goals and objectives for several different categories. And there are detailed goals and objectives for these categories: residential areas and neighborhoods, commercial areas, industrial areas and office, transportation and circulation, infrastructure and development, community facilities, parks, open space and environmental features, character, image and identity, economic development, and village services and administration. For each one of these, I think 12 different categories, there is at least one goal, if not more than one goal. And underneath each one of those goals, there are several objectives, anywhere from 8 to 20 objectives, articulating in detail what needs to be done to accomplish that goal. I'll give you a couple of things. Goals we described as desired end solutions toward which planning efforts should be directed. They are broad and long range, and they represent an end to be sought, although they may never actually be fully attained. A goal may be to have 0 vacancies in the downtown area. May never be achieved, but it's a goal you continually work toward. If that were a stated goal, underneath that, you would say, to achieve this goal, there are 10 objectives we have to try to achieve. And there are detailed objectives to help achieve that goal. Objectives are stated as something that describes more specific actions that should be undertaken by the village to advance toward the overall goals. They provide more precise and measurable guidelines for planning action. So again, for each one of these 12 categories, there are detailed goals, and then there are detailed objectives. The residential areas, for example, has 3 goals. And I'll read these off as an example. I won't go through all of them. We could be here all night just for this section. Strengthen Westmont's desirability and regional competitiveness by preserving the quality and character of its residential areas. The residential neighborhoods are one of the biggest assets this village has, as articulated by the people who live here. It's one of the things they like most about it. Now, in stating that it's one of the most important things to them, there are things that they would like to see done to make it better or to improve the residential neighborhoods. So the goal was to strengthen Westmont's desirability and regional competitiveness. Underneath that one goal, we have 8 specific objectives on how to achieve that goal. Goal number 2 for residential areas, support the long-term stability and maintenance of multifamily development in the village so that it is an asset that provides quality housing choice for a variety of household types. So understanding that there's a lot of multifamily here, how can we make it better multifamily for a broader group of people and do a better job to fit the character of the village over time, recognizing its importance. So that goal specifically is about multifamily. There are 4 objectives on how to better articulate or achieve that goal. The third and final goal for residential areas is to provide high-quality neighborhood services and infrastructure for those residential areas. And there are 11 different objectives on how to achieve that one goal. So that is just for the residential. So collectively, there are 23 different detailed objectives on how to improve residential areas of the village. 23 objectives. That's just one. We do that also for commercial, for industrial, community facilities, parks and open space, environmental features, transportation. We do that same thing. So I'm not going to go through here and read the document to you, but Chapter 4 is goals and objectives. It builds upon the outreach that people said was most important to them, identifying those priorities. It builds on the vision statement that was crafted, reflective of the visioning charrette we conducted with residents. It breaks down about 11 or 12 different categories. For each one of those categories, there is at least one, if not multiple, goals stating what we are trying to achieve as a community. And underneath each goal, there are anywhere from 4 to 20 objectives on how to achieve that goal. So that's what's contained in Chapter 4. I won't read them all, but we can answer any questions for anything that's in that chapter, but that's what is in that chapter.
Is there anybody from the public who will add anything to these goals? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? I would like to say a bit on goal number 2.
Okay.
Under residential, your number 4, encourage the transition of rental property to condominiums through expedited review and permitting and local property tax abatements. I just can't tell you how much in favor, and I sincerely hope anybody on the village board follows through on this rule. This is something that this village needs very badly.
I'm glad you said that is something that resonated almost every time we spoke with every group. It was one of those themes that was consistent regardless of who we were speaking with. So,
I hope everybody reads that and adheres to it. Okay, thank you very much, sir.
I have a question, since we've already gone down that road.
Please.
As far as that goes, how successful is that in other areas of the state, the area, the general metropolitan area, and across the country? And, with that being said, are there programs that people have established that we could follow?
sure, and there's a lot of things. The answer is yes, with varied success in different communities as they try either diligently to make it happen or it's a policy they never do anything past other than adopt the policy. There are some inherent challenges to that. Sometimes the conversion of rental to owner occupied, you're talking about structures that were built with a parking supply that doesn't meet contemporary parking demand to make it a viable, marketable, purchasable thing. People want parking. So you have to relieve the parking burden in your zoning ordinance that gives conversion some relief that new development wouldn't have. Seems minor. Those are the sort of things you have to overcome. If you have a parking ratio of 1.5 or 2 per unit, some of your older structures don't have that. They don't have the required guest parking. They may have things like that. So there are a lot of different things like that. You have to work with property owners. Market has a big play at that. Right now, rental is very hot. It's the hottest multifamily commodity, or senior affiliated, whether it's assisted living, semi-assisted, age targeted, age restricted, whatever, senior something. But right now, rental, I mean, it used to be back in the day, developers would go out of their way to provide owner-occupied. The market now is rental. Likely will be for a few more years as it starts to eke back to owner-occupied. The bigger challenge is what you do with existing issues. Oakbrook Terrace is an example. We worked on their plan several years ago. 70% rental by number, or I mean, it's a huge number there. Single-family detached versus multifamily, and of the multifamily, how much of that is rental? It's a big, big number. They sort of focused in on not converting it, but property maintenance, making sure it was high quality, high end. It could be converted if they wanted to, but it wasn't as big a deal. Property maintenance is another big deal. Whether it's owner-occupied or rental, you can start nailing down on the property maintenance or building maintenance right away. So even if something is rental, it's not, you would never know that if you didn't know the way the building was run, but because it was upkept as if it was owner-occupied. So there are a number of different mechanisms that we could talk about on how communities begin to go after conversion. It's a challenge, and different communities do it differently, and with some with more success. So.
I will say that in 2006, the village board adopted an ordinance regulating condominium conversions and kind of setting forth some ground rules, so it was clear for people who want to do that. And the ordinance states that it's positive to have equity ownership in such multifamily units and encouraged. So some of the groundwork's already there.
That's great. And the thing is, a lot of rental, and there's a lot of different times. I know initially people sometimes don't like the idea of multifamily, but if you think back of, there was a time in almost everybody's life where they were renting for some reason or another, whether it's out of college or between homes or something. And a lot of times people who are in a rental situation would love the opportunity to own what they are currently renting. So there's a lot of building owners and property owners who like the idea of offering ownership to people who are currently in a rental status. So that's real encouraging to hear. Okay, well, I'll move on then. The next section, and let me flip to it here, is now we're getting sort of the meat of the plan. But again, we wanted somebody who came along on their own, pulled this down online a couple of years from now, who read this, understood why the village got where they got with regard to this. So we put out, it's very important context. The next chapter is the land use plan. It's one of the most important things in a comprehensive plan. It used to be that comprehensive plans were called land use plans. You had a map, and some small towns still say, oh, we're putting out an RFP for a land use map. They still sort of think that way. But decades ago, it went from evolving from a land use plan to a general plan. A guy named T.J. Kent came along and said, these are general plans. It's not just land use. Well, then it was pretty much land use and transportation, and that was it. And now they've really become comprehensive. They address everything. And land use is still the biggest part of that. Every single parcel in the village, let's see if I can, oh, there we go. Every single parcel in the village was inventoried. Parcel by building. We wanted to see how property was being used in the village. Not zoned, but actually used. That's very important. Sometimes you'll have properties that are zoned single family, but there's been an apartment building sitting on there for 20 years. It was grandfathered in or whatever. Or you'll see an area that is zoned for commercial, but there's an old industrial outdoor storage area that's been there forever because someone's bought it and converted it to a restaurant. So aside from zoning, because zoning is not planning, zoning is a tool to implement planning, we took a look at land use. We inventoried and mapped every single parcel in the village. And we prepared a land use plan. And the land use plan is reflective of how you would like the land to evolve in terms of use over time. And again, this is not the same as zoning, but it lays the groundwork for someone coming in saying, the land use plan designates my parcel as commercial. Now, right now, it's zoned for residential, but it's on a busy street. It's never going to be developed as residential. So I'd like to petition for rezoning consistent with the plan and get a commercial development on the site. You're going to be like, bring it in. That's what we want to do. Start moving land use to match the plan, as opposed to just being hamstrung by whatever the zoning had been for the last several years. So it begins to lay the groundwork for what you want. If you take a look at the map, you'll see up there a few different things that sort of jump out to you that should be obvious. Yellow is residential, single-family residential. A majority of the land area, I think 70% of the units here are single-family, and it's the majority of the land use by percentage. You can see it here for everybody looking. It's this first map. The light yellow is single-family detached residential. The tan color that you'll see, I'm just going to walk over here for a sec so people can follow. It's a slightly darker tan sort of a color on Burlington, on Cass, and a few other locations. That's single-family attached, townhomes, row houses, where each individual unit has a separate entrance to the outside environment, and you come from the outside directly into your unit, but those units are attached in one structure, like a row house or a townhouse. And then there's the darker brown colors. You'll see a few of those. That's multifamily, apartments or condominiums. That's where you go from outside into a general common area, a lobby or a hallway. Then from within that common area, you go to your unit. So by definition, multifamily, apartments or condominiums, townhomes, single-family attached row houses, single-family detached, everybody's separate, no common walls, one house per lot. The red areas that you'll see primarily along Ogden Avenue, along the north, kind of the T going across, and the big red square down at the bottom on 63rd and Cass, that's commercial, and that's corridor commercial. Those are much larger blocks, deeper commercial, more intense activity, regional type of shopping centers, uses that are 10, 100,000 square feet, big uses go in those areas. That red area, that's corridor commercial. The orange areas that you see running up and down Cass and sort of along Cass and 63rd, south of 63rd, that's general commercial. Not so much inclined for the larger, more intense regional draw, but the day-to-day needs of residents or local businesses. It's more in harmony with nearby residential areas, and it's not as intense. It's not as influencing of the residential area. So we have two different commercial categories. Corridor commercial, the red, the larger, more intense commercial, the intersection of 63rd and Cass, northwest corner, and along Ogden Avenue. You have lower intensity general commercial, the orange, running up and down Cass primarily. The purple is the industrial, the business park, the office. And you can see largely that's in the north end of the village, a little bit on the south end, down on the north end of 63rd, and we'll talk about that. But the industrial is the purple, business park, light industrial, office research, things like that. You then have the blue, that is public, city hall, public works yard, police station, fire station, school, those quasi-public uses that contribute so much to the quality of life, but they could be a taxing body, they may be a semi-quasi, public, quasi-public type of use. Then the green, parks and open space. That's the land use plan. So we went through and made sure that every single parcel in the village, and in some areas the unincorporated pockets next to the village, is designated with one of those designations. It's either going to be single-family detached, single-family attached, or multifamily, general commercial or corridor commercial, light industrial / business park, public, semi-public, parks and open space. It's going to be one of those uses. So everything falls into one of those categories. And you can see the general theme. Corridors have your commercial. Where they intersect with another corridor, you have a more intense commercial node. Residential fills the majority of the area, light industrial to the north, and then community facilities and parks are typically dotted in the residential areas, the green and the blue. So that's chapter 5. The best place to look at it for those who may have seen a document is the existing land use is on page 51, and the land use plan is on page 55. It is that poster. But that is chapter 5. It introduces and proposes the land use plan in those land use designation categories I just walked you through. So that's chapter 5.
Anybody wish to comment on the, please, if you would. Do we have a sign-in sheet up there, Joe? And your name, please, if you would, sir.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Barker.
Okay, since I was not able to memorize everybody who did and did not raise their hand, were you sworn in?
I was.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. First of all, I wanted to just thank the village for having the initiative to do something like this. I think it's a great tool going forward. I have about 7 questions after I reviewed it, and I think this first question falls into this category, so I'm going to ask it. It's land use, and it also falls in other headings as well. But anyway, I would like to know how much we owe on the big box property down on 63rd Street as a village, how much we still owe on that. And I'd also like to know what the benefit of the village to continue owning that property, and if someone could explain that. And it doesn't have to be addressed to the board, but I would just like somebody from the community to get back to me with the answer to that question. Or those 2 questions, I guess it would be.
Okay, but I failed to see whether the amount of ownership or what the property is owed is germane to what we're discussing right now, Mr. Baker.
Barker?
I'm sorry, Barker.
Okay. Well, I certainly can get that
Proposed-
answer. Right.
This is a proposed land use.
Right.
And if this land is, as they say, it's commercial, you know, whether we owe some money left on it or not, I don't know. But I fail to see where that is
Okay.
germane. But you have more questions.
Well, well, and they're all different chapters, but that, that particular question, who would it,
Staff, get back to this gentleman on that, if you would.
they would answer that question? Fine.
Okay.
Fine, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
And I'll just come back for another chapter?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Feel free. Any commissioners, any questions on land use? Seeing nothing, sir, if you would.
Thanks. All right, the next chapter is the residential areas plan, and it's really a component of the land use plan. You can see it's the board, for everybody in the audience, it's the board underneath the monitor that looks exactly like the picture in the monitor. So, 2 for the price of 1 over there right now. And the residential areas plan, a lot of comprehensive plans will just simply have the land use map. And it's important to see the composite map to see how everything fits in. But once we've done that and we've articulated all the designations, we like to stand back and then pull out everything that is just residential. Because people want to know, without sort of diving through a whole bunch of other stuff, what it means to their neighborhood, or what it means to their rental property, or what's our approach to mixed use in the downtown. So that is this chapter. It's the residential areas plan. The map you can see over here that's underneath the monitor has the same land use designations that you'll see over here on the land use plan, this first easel. But you won't see the red for the commercial. You won't see the purple for the industrial. We put the open space on there for context, the green. But what you're really looking at on this map is the 4 different districts that allow residential development or residential use. You've got single-family detached, the yellow. You've got the tan color, the single-family attached. You've got the darker brown, which is multifamily. And then you have that reddish color in the middle. And I didn't point that out the first time, and I apologize. That's the downtown mixed use. That's where within the same structure you could have commercial uses on the ground floor with residential units above. And that's that reddish area right in the middle there near the downtown, near the train station, right there on Cass. So in this chapter, we focus only on the residential land uses, what they're characterized by, where they're permitted, and a discussion of those 4 districts. We identify the things in terms of how to stabilize those, how to create services that better augment those. The recommendations seek to do 3 things in this chapter, number 6. Preserve and enhance the village's housing stock, maintain and or reduce the ratio of rental units to owner-occupied, and 3, promote transit-supportive land uses, including multifamily residential and mixed use within the downtown near the metro station. And I was going to read off real quickly what the land use policies are for the residential chapter, real quickly. And I'm not going to read them in detail, but I'm going to give you the gist of what they are. There's about 8 of them. Preserve the character of the single-family neighborhoods of the village. Encourage the maintenance of proper upkeep of existing structures while accommodating appropriate design and new-scale construction. Use a condominium conversion ordinance to encourage the transformation of rental properties to owner-occupied. Provide a range of quality housing types that serve residents in all stages of life, including single-family homes of varying size and types and multifamily units of different size and types. Promote the development of owner-occupied dwelling units as a component of mixed use within the downtown and near the transit-oriented development near the downtown metro station. Consider the impact of new residential development on the schools, public library, water, wastewater, and other municipal facilities. So if somebody comes in for a new residential development, ensure that the village assess the impact of those services and infrastructures on whatever residential is being proposed. Study opportunities to provide senior housing in appropriate locations that provide proximity and ease of access to daily goods and services for the residents in the senior housing. Provide sidewalks throughout Westmont's residential neighborhoods, linking schools, parks, homes, and destinations. Employ traffic calming measures to discourage cut-through traffic. A lot of traffic on Ogden, a lot of traffic on 63rd, a lot of traffic on Cass. You don't want it filtering through the neighborhoods. So the mechanisms on how to prevent traffic cut-through and flow in those areas. Enforce property maintenance codes for all residential properties. Ensure residential areas are adequately screened and buffered from adjacent residential uses, non-residential uses and activity. So where you have residential next to a commercial or an industrial, make sure the screening, the buffering is in place. And remove stray commercial uses from residential areas in order to reinforce the neighborhood character. There are a few isolated commercial or non-residential uses tucked in the neighborhoods, and over time you want to see those uses get out of the residential neighborhoods so you can stabilize the character of those areas as opposed to having them deteriorate. So those are the primary policies of this section. This section then goes on to talk in more detail about how to do those things, focusing on the 4 residential land use designations that were first brought to light in the land use plan in chapter before. So that is the residential areas plan.
Is there anybody from the public who will speak on this chapter?
Yep.
Yes, chapter 6. Mr. Barker.
And again, I'm not sure if this question is for the staff or for the planners, but I would like this question answered. Is there any potential to look for the help, state or federal funding to transition some of the apartments into possible senior living complexes? And that was taken from the plan, so I think it's a valid question. I don't know if it's a possibility, though. Maybe the planners know.
Mr. Chairman, if I can real
Please,
quickly.
if you would.
The last chapter, and we're sort of jumping around, but that's okay. Is that your only question for the?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
We're sort of jumping around and not to kick the can down the road on this, and we can certainly get back to you. The last chapter of the document is implementation, on how to begin to structure an implementation strategy going forward. And a big part of that is to identify potential funding sources. And the gentleman is right. There are funding sources now that aren't general pools of money, but earmarked for very specific undertakings. There is funding specifically geared to pedestrian amenities. There's funding specifically geared to transit. There's funding specifically geared to the acquisition and development of open space or recreation. And we can examine with a little bit of research to see if there's any funding mechanism in place that is geared for the conversion of existing residential for senior purposes. I don't know offhand, we would have to check. But if we did and found that, we could put it into the implementation section along with the other identified funding options. Okay?
Any further public comment on this? Okay, for chapter 6, we'll close the public comment. Staff? Commissioners? I do have one question. Oh, you're not getting away free. On your residential areas plan, along the Burlington and Quincy corridor,
Okay?
it looks like you're going, pretty much recommending single-family attached residential.
Correct.
Okay, are you aware that on our zoning map, we are general residential right now for high density?
Mm-hmm.
And you're suggesting that we decrease that?
Yeah, and again, we're not talking specific densities, more of, given the lot depths and where it is in the community, more of a character of development. Again, we don't get into densities here, but when you're talking multiple family apartments or condominiums, by the design of the physical structure, you're going to have higher densities per acre than you will with a single-family attached, a row house. But we think, given the character of how we think the area ought to evolve, given the existing conditions in the context with the market viability, that a single-family attached, a row house type of approach would be better along that area than would be multifamily. And we're taking into consideration traffic, access, lot depth, all of those other things. We think it's still, in some communities, it would still be considered a multifamily. We've just broken it out and delineated as single-family attached, but it's still multiple units in a building, but the design is different. It's more of a row house or a townhome as opposed to an apartment building. But the answer is yes to your question.
I'm surprised. Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, if we could move on, Chapter
You
7,
bet.
please.
And I tend to talk quickly. I'm 1 in 9 kids. I talk really fast. It's sort of a survival mechanism. If I get going too fast, just tell me to slow down.
How to reach for the potatoes real fast?
I can eat fast and talk fast, and it's not a good combination. The next section, Chapter 7, is a commercial areas plan. And like the residential areas plan, it is a component, a call-out, if you will, of the land use plan. It really focuses on, let's do this, there you go. It really focuses on, again, like the land use plan, focused on the 4 residential areas. This really talks about the different commercial areas. And it's over here, it's the first easel right over here, folks, to my left. And you guys can probably see it best from the screen, the commission. And what it really identifies is a few different things. Again, it identifies the corridor commercial areas, that darker red. It identifies the general commercial, largely the areas along Cass, which is a little bit less intense, not a regional draw. The properties are much more diminished in capacity for new development because of lot depth primarily. That's a general commercial, lower intensity commercial. The mixed-use area right in the center by the railroad tracks and Cass, by the metro station, where you would anticipate a mixed-use sort of commercial with residential or office above, but retail or restaurant on the ground floor. And then also shown on this map are outlined in yellow are the different sub-areas that we're talking about in town. And there are 4 different sub-areas. Not surprisingly, they largely are located near the commercial areas. Not entirely commercial, but again, in an area that is 70% residential, those are your most stable areas, least susceptible to change in terms of land use intensity. The commercial areas are a bit more volatile and are likely to turn over and change in recent years, so that's where we focus our sub-area planning level of effort. But again, this plan talks about things like the commercial mixed use in that area along Cass and the metro station, creating a pedestrian environment where people could walk more easily, catered not so much only to the automobile, but the pedestrian experience. Talks about the nature of Ogden Avenue and continuing to do that. Talks about the revitalization strategy for really sort of reinventing what could be down at Cass and 63rd. And it identifies in here the 4 different sub-areas outlined in yellow, and it talks in greater detail about the parking, the redevelopment, the intensity, and the overall character of the other 3 commercial areas, mixed use, general commercial, and corridor commercial, in more articulated fashion than in the general land use plan section. So that's what's contained in Chapter 7. It is the commercial areas plan, pulling out and highlighting only the commercial areas from the land use plan. And that's what is contained in Chapter 7. Chapter 7 does not contain the detailed sub-area plans. That's in Chapter 8. But the notion of the sub-area plans and the boundaries for those are articulated in this graphic. But the discussion is in the following chapter. So that's Chapter 7.
Does anybody from the public have any questions at all on this chapter? Okay, we'll close the comment from the public on this chapter. Commissioners? I may be getting ahead of myself, but on the commercial areas plan on the south end, you are including west of William Street in that, in the yellow.
In this sub-area, the sub-area is not limited only to commercial. There may be some uses adjacent to it that was included in the sub-area plan. Sometimes, stop me if I'm cutting you off, but if you look at the map, it's not designated as commercial. but it's within the boundary of the sub-area. Sometimes sub-areas go beyond the exact parcel you're examining to provide context to what you are proposing to change. So if there's a residential area or a park next to a commercial area, the discussion may be on the commercial piece, but you want to show that park or the residential area because it frames the discussion of the commercial piece. So it's not designated as commercial, but it's framed within the context of the sub-area boundary because it's important to the discussion.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
I guess we're done with that chapter. Next chapter, please.
All right. The next chapter, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Hamill, and he's going to walk through fairly briefly the 4 different sub-areas. They're Ogden Avenue, Naperville Road and Cass, the downtown, and then 63rd and Cass. So Doug Hamill's going to walk through that real quickly.
And Chairman, I'd just like to ask your preference. As we move through this, I can tackle the chapter as a whole and go through all 4 sub-areas, or we can stop for question and comment after each one if that would.
If it's comfortable with you, we could stop at each section then.
Okay. Well, in a community like Westmont, you may ask, we have all these commercial areas. Why do we need to think about sub-areas? In Westmont, each commercial area is so distinct based on its history, the kind of parcels that are occupied, whether they're deep, narrow, wide, or shallow, the amounts of access and the types of access, whether people are accessing it from the train and walking from their nearby neighborhoods, or whether they're coming from other parts of the region and coming in by car. So it was really important for us to step back and think about the different forces at play in each portion of the commercial areas within the village. And that's what the sub-areas chapter is really all about, to give different recommendations and different levels of nuance to each of the commercial areas around the village. The map on the image that's on the screen now just reinforces what John pointed out with the yellow boundaries on the commercial areas plan, identifying what the 4 sub-areas are. So I think we've covered that graphic in enough detail. But for each sub-area plan that I'm going to walk through, there's 3 basic components. A land use framework that talks about in more detail within the structure that we've identified in the village-wide land use plan, specific nuances of land use that might happen within the sub-area. There's a transportation framework that talks about different transportation and access recommendations. And there is an image and identity framework that talks about the character, the look of the corridor, and how it might distinguish itself both from other portions within the village and your neighbors on either side or in other portions of the region. So diving in first with the Ogden Avenue corridor plan, and there's no magic in terms of the order of these. I think we just went logically from north to south, so we're not implying necessarily that Ogden Avenue is more important, but that's just the way the plan flushed out. There are, even within the Ogden area sub-area, it's important to recognize that there are distinct districts within that geography. So we really divvied it out into 4 major sections. The West Gateway Character District, which on the image on the screen, and the image on the screen is showing the western half of Ogden Avenue. The kind of aqua color to the west is the West Gateway Character District. Typically small parcels, limited opportunities for major redevelopment, but more incremental improvements. And they tend to share a close relationship with adjacent residential neighborhoods. The Ogden and Cass Character District is kind of that salmon color. This is, on the future land use plan, it's that regional commercial, the corridor commercial area that can accommodate larger redevelopment projects on deeper parcels. And as we move eastward, we hit what we've designated as the Auto Mile Character District. It's where you have this great agglomeration of tax-generating auto dealerships. And they have their own needs and kind of establish a unified character along that portion of the corridor. And moving east from there, there's a gap where there's residential on the north side of Ogden Avenue that back up to the corridor. And then east of that is the East Gateway Character District, really kind of a unique agglomeration of some office in the northern portion of the Character District, and then some retail and hotel uses at the fronting along along Ogden Avenue. In this portion of the corridor, one of the unique challenges is that you don't own the other side of the street. So it presents interesting challenges from a zoning and character policy standpoint about what you do that your neighbors to the south might be thinking completely differently about the corridor. So that's one of the nuances of this portion of the corridor.
I'll just jump in here, just to reorient everybody. We get so used to looking at these, sometimes we forget to orient. These are the 4 boards for the sub-areas Doug's going to be talking about. Each one is a different sub-area. And you'll notice this is the first one. This is Ogden. See this sort of a goofy shape? That fits right here, this yellow outlined goofy shape. So this board that he's talking about fits in this yellow highlighted area here. The next one here is Naperville and Cass. It's sort of a cross section here. That drops and is highlighted here in the plan. So these are more detailed, zeroed-in recommendations for the areas highlighted in this more general map, and they'll go right down this wall. That's sort of how the puzzle pieces fit.
So focusing on goofy shape number 1. This is the land use framework for the western portion of the Ogden Avenue corridor. And as I mentioned, let me just keep up with my own talking here. As I mentioned, the western portion of the Ogden Avenue is really, to a certain extent, hamstrung by the residential development to the north and south and the size of the parcels that you have to work with. Our recommendations in here include generally maintaining the kind of uses that are along there now, local retail, local service, small restaurant, but working to improve those and improve their relationship with the residential areas through buffering, parking and access management, which I'll get to in the next slide, but really sustaining the type of uses that are there now. Excuse me. Also included on this slide in the eastern portion is the Ogden and Cass character district, kind of the red boundary. Let me get my mouse to work. Roughly from this portion to the east, which includes the larger shopping center and the beginning or abuts the auto mile portion. This is the opportunity to continue the larger format footprints that exist along there for commercial development. But we've also identified a couple opportunity sites fronting on Ogden Avenue where outlot development could occur to potentially add some intensity to the area and also potentially change the character of that portion of the corridor. As we move east, we focus on the auto mile portion, the portion outlined in blue. Again, focusing on sustaining and giving the services necessary for the auto dealerships to do what they do. They have specific needs in terms of access to their inventory and storage of their inventory. So we think there's some strategies that could come in play there in terms of how they might work collectively together to mitigate some of those impacts rather than tackling it individually, and that may not lead to an ideal situation. And then moving furthest to the east, to the East Gateway Character District. We've identified the St. James Crossing site as a potential opportunity area. The way that site is currently configured, it's not ideal from a visibility standpoint for commercial and service or retail and service tenants. We think there might be an opportunity. There could certainly be chances to keep some of the structure that's in place there, but reconfigure it to be a more prominent and more positive commercial environment in that portion of the corridor. So after looking at the land use, the land use framework, we can then overlay on top of that some of the transportation and access recommendations. Again, moving from west to east, I know there's a little bit of a redundant flow here, but it's a lot easier to look at these maps with these things separated out than all at once, or it gets a little too confusing. But in the western portion of the corridor, the West Gateway Character District, again, there's not the opportunity for large-scale redevelopment given the small lot size in this area. So it really becomes a matter of how can we manage access to each individual lot in a more effective way that really sets out to accomplish 2 goals. 1, to improve access for that actual tenant or business, and 2, to relieve some of the pressure on Ogden Avenue. So some of the key components that we think about here are cross-access easements between adjacent lots where parking aisles may line up. It might be a logical connection to allow a punch-through between the lots. That allows the opportunity to potentially reduce some curb cuts on Ogden Avenue, eliminating the need for people to enter into traffic out of a lot and then come back into a lot just for the sake of going from one property to an adjacent one. We've also identified some of the yellow circles that show up on this plan, identify intersection enhancements. These might be key opportunities where there's signalization upgrades or pedestrian amenities like crosswalks that need to be provided, just to try to transform Ogden Avenue from such a heavy predominance of auto orientation to start to accommodate some of the other modes of mobility that could benefit surrounding neighborhoods. That is essentially the recommendations for this portion. And in the Ogden and Cass Character District at the east end of this image, in addition to the things I've already talked about, we do recommend some ideas for internal streets on some of the larger redevelopment lots. Just, again, trying to relieve some of that stress from the Ogden Avenue corridor and enhance circulation between the uses that already exist. Moving east into the auto mile, again, a lot of the same principles are showing up here. It's just a matter of how they might get applied to different portions of the corridor. Both at the intersection of Ogden and Cass and also at the intersection of Blackhawk in Ogden, we show an icon for wayfinding. We think this could be a critical component for at Ogden and Cass, guiding people to the downtown and to other amenities throughout the village. And at Blackhawk, this could be an opportunity for wayfinding that helps people find their way around the different auto dealerships and services that are available in this area. So a lot of the recommendations are about access management, but there's also this information and safety component that we're building into the plan as well. Moving east to the East Gateway Character District around St. James Crossing. Again, the same kinds of components in play, the cross-access easement, the reduction of curb cuts. In this portion, though, we also show Pasqualini Drive as a key connection for potential bike rail. Clarendon Hills to the south has a bike rail already in place. It would make sense to try to connect to that to enhance the regional mobility provided by bike infrastructure that's already in place. Moving back again, jumping back to the western end of the corridor and looking at the West Gateway Character District, this slide touches on opportunities to enhance the image and character of Ogden Avenue. The large purple rectangle at the west end of the corridor is the opportunity for a gateway. There is a sign out there right now that says, "Welcome to Westmont." I think if you're driving above 30 miles an hour, you may miss it. So this is an opportunity between gateway signage, landscaping, the design of buildings themselves. This is an opportunity to create an announcement into the community. Separate yourself from Downers Grove, separate yourself from other communities, and really make Westmont Ogden Avenue a unique place in and of itself. We have recommendations in here for working with IDOT to address the streetscaping along Ogden Avenue. There's a number of different levels of streetscaping that could be implemented over time. It could be as simple as banners that get put up on existing light structures. It could be decorative light structures that get phased in over time. Or if you really want to push the envelope, you can think about wholesale streetscaping and ideas of landscape medians or those things. Recognizing that IDOT is going to be a key player and a key partner in implementing any of those, but the conversation has to start somewhere, so we included that in the plan. We've also identified the opportunity for identifying buffers from the surrounding residential areas. You can see the green lines both to the north and south of the properties on Ogden Avenue. We think this is a key component along all the commercial areas to maintain the viability of the residential areas and ensure that the commercial areas offer the benefits without too many negative impacts. One specific thing that we talked about in the image and identity, you may notice the red hashing along some of these lots. I think there's a great opportunity to be a more sustainable community. There are very, very large areas of asphalt that pop up in these large shopping centers. They may be the opportunity for either on-site detention or permeable surfaces that can mitigate some of the stress on the infrastructure along the corridor. So that essentially takes us through the West Gateway Character District and Ogden Avenue Character District. Moving then to the east to capture the Auto Mile and East Gateway. A lot of the same things are in play. The buffer against the residential areas, the potential streetscaping along the corridor, the gateway at the east end as you would come in under the Route 83 underpass. All of these play a role in the way that the community is going to be viewed in really its most prominent spine. One of the unique things that we called out in this area is the area between the auto mile and the East Gateway where the residential backs up. Currently, there's a fence that is, it serves a purpose as a buffer to the residential, but we think that might be an opportunity for an interesting kind of local mural or artwork that can, fill that gap between the commercial areas as you enter from the east. So that is an overview of the Ogden Avenue sub-area, if there's any questions from the commission.
Okay, we'll ask the public first. Does the public have any questions on the Ogden Avenue sub-area? Seeing nobody raising their hands, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? Okay, let's...
I had a quick question. Did you look at existing signage along Ogden Avenue and have any thoughts about sign regulations when you talked about streetscaping and improving the aesthetic vision for that area?
Yeah, I think all too often when people think of streetscaping, they think about lights and medians and things like that, but the private contribution to the streetscape is crucial if you want to go down that route. I think both by managing the sign ordinance, the design and location of buildings on the site, and also landscaping, especially where parking lots are so prominent, to the extent that you can screen those or at least make them more attractive, all adds up to a more attractive streetscape. We do mention specific elements in here. For example, managing the amount of light that's produced by the auto dealerships, them screening their parking lots, their display lots, but still providing key areas where they can do more substantial displays of vehicles that are more designed and more intended and targeted. So certainly, I think if the village were to move seriously towards a more attractive Ogden Avenue, an approach to signage would have to be considered.
I wish he had a magic bullet could help us with those two signs on Ogden Avenue. I think you know which ones I mean. North side of the road?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I think we've taken several pictures of those.
Yes. Okay, sir, next sub-area, if you would.
Thank you. So now we want to move on to the Naperville and Cass sub-area, and there's a lot less jumping around on this one because the whole sub-area can fit on one slide, so hopefully it's not as confusing as we move through it. The Naperville and Cass sub-area is rather unique. It's a bit of a mishmash of uses. There's kind of the central node of commercial activity right around Naperville Road and Cass, but as soon as you move away from that, you get a mix of residential, kind of some small leftover and lingering industrial, and then the transition to the downtown area as you move south. So looking at the land use framework, we really focus the commercial node around the Naperville and Cass intersection. If there is to be real sustainable and vital commercial activity, it should be concentrated in this node. Moving outside of that to the east along Naperville Road and Chicago Avenue, the blue outline immediately east of the commercial core is neighborhood business. And through the discussions with the steering committee, they had specific questions about what do we do in this area. And the plan generally recommends that you might not want to hem yourself into specific land uses that should be allowed in this area. Keep it a little bit more open as the market begins to define itself, but make sure that the regulations that are in place don't have negative impacts on the surrounding residential areas. So it's a little bit more of a hands-off land use approach, but when managed correctly can give the village and development flexibility to make that an active area. Moving east of that, we would envision a transition into the residential character that kind of comes into play as you move east along Chicago Avenue. Similarly, west of Cass on Naperville Road, you already begin to see a transition towards residential. There's some residential that currently hosts commercial or residential structures that host commercial services. So the approach there might be to consider maintaining commercial uses, but make sure that their character is in line with the surrounding development. Looking more specifically at the transportation recommendations for this area, I think you're going to see a lot of what we already talked about on the Ogden Avenue corridor, the opportunity for curb cut reduction and cross-access connections between lots, making the actual intersection of Naperville and Cass itself more pedestrian-friendly and more navigable for people on foot, connecting together the bike path network. There's a fair amount of segments that go through this area. We think this is an opportunity to use Naperville Road or Chicago Avenue as an opportunity to connect bike routes across town. And one of the specific recommendations that we talk about is there is where Wilmette Avenue currently dead ends into Chicago Avenue. We're showing a green arrow that would, it represents a proposed roadway realignment where Naperville Road would turn south into a more controlled intersection and alleviate some of the confusion that happens as you approach Naperville Road, or as you come on Naperville Road from the east and approach Chicago Avenue and Cass and don't really have a sense of how the intersection works. And this would also open up the opportunity for some potential redevelopment sites that might be more feasible for development. In looking at the image and identity component, again, we look at the opportunity for local gateways to identify this as a unique portion or unique commercial area within the village. We show, kind of the brown tan color that's on the plan. Reflects what I talked about before by making sure that development in here is reflective of a residential character, so that even where there's commercial uses embedded within this area, they can bleed seamlessly into the surrounding development and minimize its visual impacts. Again, reinforcing the buffers, the green lines kind of surrounding the sub-area, reinforcing those buffers and that delineation between the commercial and residential uses. And in terms of opportunity sites and development, we think the greatest opportunity for redevelopment in this area is kind of that Naperville Road, Chicago Avenue triangle area where we're proposing the roadway realignment. And that roadway realignment would just create more suitable structures to receive, or more suitable parcels to receive redevelopment. So that is the quick overview of the Naperville and Cass sub-area.
Any public comment on this sub-area, Chapter 8? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? You're all, you think the realignment of Naperville Road to Chicago is a good idea? Seems a bit controversial to me.
It's my street. It'll never happen.
Okay.
Houses in the way.
Pardon?
Some houses in the way.
Yes, right, exactly. Okay, sir, next sub-area, if you would.
So moving south along Cass Avenue, we enter the downtown area. One of the things that we've observed about the downtown area is that it really tends to stretch itself pretty thinly along Cass Avenue as you move north into the Naperville and Cass sub-area. So what we wanted to do in this sub-area is provide some focus about what can happen with those first couple blocks that are so critical and so character-defining immediately north of the train station. So the bold red outline is that what we've called the mixed-use core. This is where you might have the most concentrated activity of ground floor commercial, perhaps what you might call the primary downtown uses, and with residential or office activities above. Moving south of the rail corridor, we've identified the purple outline. We've called it the civic core. It's not meant to imply that it has to be all civic uses, but you already have a fair amount of civic uses in place here, and those can be the building blocks for additional development around them. Moving east and west on Burlington, we've identified the opportunity for different kinds of development depending on what might happen with some existing uses. To the east specifically, there's the existing industrial and public works uses. There are other components of this plan that we'll touch on later that talk about the potential relocation of some of those activities. That might open up the opportunity for both roadway realignments and redevelopment that could redefine the eastern portion of downtown and hopefully bring more people closer to the uses that could support the downtown. Looking at the transportation improvements, there's not a whole lot here that's revolutionary. I think that there's, in every meeting or in every group that we talk to, there's always conversation about downtown congestion on Cass Avenue caused by the rail corridor. There's no specific recommendation in the plan for a grade separated crossing, whether it be at Cass or some other portion. I think that's just an ongoing conversation that's going to continue to have to be tackled. But I would just caution that whenever you're talking about a grade separated crossing, there are a large number of other issues that come along with that, from the impact on the parcels that front that that front that corridor to the impacts of peripheral traffic as traffic patterns change to take advantage of grade separated crossings. So there was no clear solution that came forth as a result of this process. However, there may be opportunities with the public works portion immediately east of downtown to potentially realign some of that. I think there's a great prototype along the Burlington Northern line of Burlington Avenue running immediately along the rail corridor and development fronting on that. With those sites vacated, there's an opportunity to replicate and continue that kind of model along immediately east of downtown Westmont. Beyond that, we show a number of locations for potential parking wayfinding, intersection improvements, and connections to the bike trail networks that are already in place. In terms of the image and character, I would venture to guess that from what we've heard, the community has expressed that image and character is probably most critical in this portion of the community. It has the bones already in place to be a very attractive place, and any development that comes in should certainly complement and build on that rather than compromising it and moving away from it. At the north, we identify a location for a downtown gateway. This is different than the community gateways that might happen on the fringes of the community. It might specifically represent the character of downtown and welcome you to this portion of the community. We talk about a consistent a consistent street wall along portions of Cass Avenue that implies that zero setback built up to the sidewalk, very pedestrian oriented, nice facades, transparent and active storefronts that define traditional downtowns. We also talk about the need for screening and buffering. Again, whether it's the Ogden Avenue corridor or downtown or 63rd and Cass, the buffering of the relationship between commercial and residential is so critical to make sure that both can function appropriately. In terms of the opportunity sites, we really focus on the public works site and the quasi-industrial lots immediately south of the rail line. These are probably the greatest opportunity to add to the character through redevelopment in the downtown. That is the quick overview of the downtown sub-area, if you have any questions or comments.
Well, first we'll go to the public. Mr. Barker, if you would. Young lady, I saw you second, so.
Two things come to mind with the downtown area. One of them is our parking study a few years ago. I believe it concluded that there was adequate parking in the downtown, and if I read in the comprehensive plan, it shows that the people still feel that we need to create additional parking in the downtown area. So you have a potential for conflict there. Some people say you need it, some people say you don't, but we have two different opinions. And I'm wondering if somebody could speak to that. And then the other one is, in reviewing the parks in the community, there's nothing in the immediate downtown area. And I support the idea of creating a green space or a city center in that area. And I'm wondering if there's been any efforts between the village and the park district to do some grant writing, to be able to get some money. I know Bob Fleck has done a marvelous job with the Park District, that maybe if the village and the Park District work together and something like that, they'd be able to obtain some money and develop an area down there. It would benefit cruising nights, it would benefit a taste of Westmont, and it will also put some people down there for foot traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Miss? If you would please sign in and give your name.
My name is Audrey Payne. I am sworn. I would just like to make the additional comment that this downtown sub-area south of the tracks, east of Cass, was commented on as a prime area for redevelopment. And I think it's absolutely correct that if you think about what you see in the other villages as you go by on the train, on either side of the tracks are all of the cute little storefronts that we need to have. That enormous behemoth that stands on the corner needs to go away. Needs to be part of the downtown storefront, retail, restaurant, and not that enormous medical building looking thing.
Thank you. One Westmont Center. For clarification, you mean One Westmont Center?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any further public comment? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners?
It's interesting.
Part of what is being discussed in here, I may be jumping a little bit, but a new public works facility. Between you and I, south of the Burlington, east of Cass, right adjacent to the Clarendon Hills, where they have their public works facility, might be an ideal spot for us to consider sticking something like that. Surely wouldn't disrupt Clarendon Hills since theirs is already there.
A lot of vacancy down there, too.
A lot of vacancy down there, so might be something to think about.
That comment.
Again, the only, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Again, the only other comment I had on the sub-area for downtown was, I have to disagree with you on the density. I sincerely think we should stay with our plan. What we have is our multi-use high density rather than townhomes or low density, if you would. But just my opinion. Please, Mr. Fedesco, Commissioner.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with that comment you made about the Public Works facility possibly being located on the south side of the tracks at the eastern edge of our community, how far did the study go as far as the downtown business area along the south side of the tracks? Is it just past the lumber yards, or is it much further down? Because I can't quite tell. It just looks like it only goes a block or so.
Moving east?
Yes, east.
South of the tracks?
Yes.
That's the extent to which we took this sub-area plan.
Okay, so you didn't actually go all the way down the tracks.
Correct. I think the thinking there is that when you begin to move too far, it becomes disassociated with the downtown and begins to lose some of its influence. And we would have to revisit that and look more closely at how the land use transitions.
Yeah, well, it's not being as part of downtown as you're saying. I didn't quite understand what that was going to be. Is it going to still stay that bit of industrial, or would that transition to residential?
If
I
you-
couldn't find that in the plan, really.
If you go back to the proposed land use plan, that area is listed similarly to the west side.
Oh,
as
okay,
the
so it would be,
attached
okay.
The townhouse.
residential.
Attached residential,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Then it's answered. I missed that. Sorry.
Anything?
That's all.
Okay. All right, sir, let's go to the next sub-area.
Thank you. moving to the southern portion of the community to 63rd and Cass. Certainly an interesting area in terms of the dynamics at play from the kinds of parcels that there are available to work with to the existing land use mix. What we try to do is give some structure and think about significant areas of potential redevelopment in this portion of Westmont. If we move north and south along Cass, the large red outline at the at the eastern end of this sub-area, that really is essentially sustaining the kind of uses that are there now. The smaller lot development. There's limited opportunity for wholesale redevelopment because of the depth of the parcels and the kind of the individual nature of development that's happened there. And while those could be improved, as we'll talk about later in the transportation and image, that kind of land use is most appropriate in the future along that area. There are two multifamily areas included in this sub-area. Chairman, to your comment before, this plan shows those as to remain, but we brought them into this portion so that we have some context and framework for how the other commercial areas might interact with those. So I'll touch on that in the image and character section as well. The largest area of significance in this sub-area is the yellow outline, the U shape that includes the village-owned property. And we envision this as the area of the largest potential redevelopment, partially because the village has the property there and it could be folded into a larger redevelopment project, but also because there are a number of commercial uses there that are compromised through some vacancy, and there's also some uses that are quasi-industrial and might not be most appropriate for a high-visibility commercial corridor like 63rd. So we envision this as a significant opportunity for redevelopment, and I will talk a little bit more about what that looks like in just a moment. In terms of transportation and access, we think the critical things here, again, just like a lot of the other portions of the village, the opportunity to create access between adjacent lots, the opportunity to remove curb cuts along the corridors and ease the traffic patterns on Cass and 63rd, but also using the large lot commercial areas. You'll notice a couple bold purple arrows where we're talking about ensuring that the street pattern, the internal street pattern for large commercial redevelopment should align with the existing street network to minimize the number of conflict points as you move up and down the corridor. I think some relatively basic concepts, but they can be critical to the long-term viability and functionality of the sub-area. Again, here we touch on the connection, filling in some of the gaps in the bicycle network with new segments that can, again, provide an enhanced regional bicycle mobility. In terms of the image and identity for 63rd and Cass, we think this is a great opportunity for identifying the character and nature of the community when you're coming in from the south and from the east. You have two gateway locations into the community, one at the east end of 63rd and one at the south end of Cass, where there are actually points of entry into the community. And then at the intersection itself, you have a major commercial node with what we've identified as the opportunity for redevelopment, where the design and character of that redevelopment can act very strongly to reinforce the intended character for the sub-area as a whole and for the community as a whole. So something to think about in addition to potential streetscaping improvements on Cass and 63rd Street. And what this might all look like. For this sub-area, we did a three-dimensional models to articulate some more specific site plan principles and design principles that might be put into place along in this sub-area. See if, using my mouse here, this big box, which is labeled A, would be situated on the village-owned property. The way that this sub-area plan is illustrated in this scenario, and I should say that the likelihood that this is actually what gets built might be extremely slim. There's a lot of more specific engineering and design considerations that we just haven't gotten into. But left-hand big box sits on the village-owned property and could be designed and developed so that it could be developed in the short term, and then as the surrounding commercial developments transform, they could be stitched together through internal roadway networks, consistent design, and other complementary land uses. We've also showed the opportunity for little pedestrian clusters throughout this redevelopment area, where you can certainly park in one area, you can do shopping almost as if it's a pedestrian mall, and access a number of different stores from one parking spot. So we're trying to bring back, rather than a very fragmented and individual redevelopment concept with a number of different buildings, a unified development concept that if there is one piece of non-monetary value to the village owning the property down there, it is the potential for some leverage in helping to dictate how future development happens on the properties around it. So we think that's a critical piece of thinking about how redevelopment might happen in the southern end of the community. And that is an overview of the 63rd and Cass sub-area.
Okay. Will the public comment on this sub-area at all? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners, any comments? You're happy with everything?
I'm silent somehow. I don't know how you did it.
He was on the committee.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Thank God I sent him.
Okay, let's do,
Okay.
you're going to do Chapter 9 then?
With that, I will turn it back over to John to walk through the remaining portions of the plan.
Thanks, Doug. All right, I'll go through the remaining chapters fairly expeditiously. I think a lot of it was covered when Doug went through the different sub-areas. So the next thing is community facilities. This is Chapter 9. And community facilities are those things like schools, city facilities, parks are going to be, as a community facility, but we're talking about that in Chapter 10. So in Chapter 9, we're really talking at the school districts and some of the city facilities. The school districts provide 6 different schools throughout the village. And the school district is planning, some renovations to the elementary schools, some window replacements for the high school. Nothing is planned for the junior high in terms of renovation or anything in the near term. These are near term. Long term, the school anticipates doing renovations and upkeep of all their facilities. There is some discussion as to what to do with the elementary school in the southern part of the community, probably relocated administrative offices or other administrative functions of the school district into that facility for the elementary school on the south side. One of the things we talked about in community facilities, Chairman, is something you mentioned, was the public works facility. This is something that came up early and often over the course of the last year, year and a half. There seems to be general consensus that a new facility is needed. There was a study done more than 10 years ago that indicated that about 5 acres would be needed to accommodate a new facility. There are some properties around town. If you look at the graphic that you see over here on your screen, and it's the second to last board over here on this side of the room, those yellow areas that are outlined, there's 5 of them. Those are potential locations for where the Public Works facility may go. Public Works has not done a detailed assessment to determine exactly what is needed, but they know, based on the other report that was done years ago, that a new space is needed and approximately how much land would be required. What we did is we floated by several different options that may be potentially viable to meet their needs, both in terms of available land and location in terms of serving the community throughout the entire village. Some have, they all have pros and cons, some better than others. But one of the things we have to be careful of is if the community public works facility goes in someplace, what are going to be the impacts of adjacent residential areas or commercial traffic or activity? So it can sometimes be a pretty intense use with outdoor storage of vehicles, diesel engines starting up in the morning, fleet vehicles rolling out. We need to be careful on where that is placed. So we identified in the community facilities plan graphic that you see before you, and I believe that's on page 121, those yellow areas identify the potential locations generally where a public works facility could go in terms of a viable option going forward. They all have to be vetted by the village, doing a needs analysis of what they provide in terms of pros and cons, but it would likely be located somewhere in one of these 5 areas that we've identified on the map. And I have to go through that a little bit more in the future. The fire department, again, has 2 different stations serving everything in the village pretty well. They do want to make sure that although water service and pressure is enough and sufficient. We should work with the fire department on any expansions of operations of development along Cass Avenue. As new development takes place, residential or commercial, the facilities like the fire department and the police department, the public safety departments, really need to be kept in the loop when these new development intensities begin to manifest, to make sure the services are able to adequately produce for new development in terms of the site design and how the vehicles can get to and from the site, on and off the site, for emergency response appropriateness. Same thing goes to the Westmont Police Department. We work with both of those entities. Again, I talked about the school district, nothing major. They're looking for adaptive reuse of the elementary school to the south. And then they have pretty general upkeep and rehabilitation of some of their existing schools. Again, short-term, the elementary schools and the high school. No short-term desire or programming right now for the junior high, although long-term they would all receive upkeep. And that goes for both the community school district, their schools, and the marker, and I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, School District 60, and what they have proposed. They don't have proposed any new facilities or taking anything offline. The public library has some concerns with a growing population and how to serve that population as residential numbers increase over time. With the library located in the northern portion of the village, they would like to explore opportunities going forward with how they might be able to have some sort of satellite facility at the southern end of the community to serve that area of the population as well. And going forward, to make sure that they can do the rehabilitation and upkeep they need to continue to work with the village to continually re-examine the library contribution as part of new development as dictated in the municipal code. That's something very important going forward. So again, if you take a look at this, we talked about and covered very quickly the Flag Creek Water Reclamation District and the Downers Grove Sanitary District. Nothing major for any of those two. We highlight what services and what arrangements are made and how those services are provided in conjunction with the village, so people know looking at this document, and recommend a continued going forward of examining these with the potential of a new water tower someplace in the village and where that might be located. So again, all these recommendations are flagged geographically on the map on page 121. We identify all the existing community facilities as well as the locations for the potential relocation or location of a new public works facility on page 121. That's community facilities.
Will we have any public comment on this chapter? Please, if you would.
I just need to say that I think the idea of even putting it on the map to consider dumping Ty Warner Park for a public works facility is ludicrous. It is the showpiece of our town for our families. All of my friends and neighbors who live somewhere else besides Westmont, the first thing they say when you talk about where you live is, oh my God, that Ty Warner Park is my favorite place to take my kids. To think of doing away with that for infrastructure is ludicrous.
I don't think it says that there.
There's a big yellow square around Ty Warner Park.
Go ahead, Doug.
There's spaces around that, though, all around the outside.
Yeah, it's a matter of clarification. Everything that we've heard from the community is that Ty Warner Park is a valued asset. We're not recommending the removal of that, but we had to draw the yellow blob around the properties that encompass that, and graphically, if you do a yellow blob within a yellow blob, what does that mean? So I think if you read deeper into the plan and the narrative that goes along with it, we're really talking about the opportunity for the properties that ring around Ty Warner Park, but maintaining the recreation facility as it is.
And that's a good point. You noticed it was a challenging thing to show graphically. It would either look like a donut, a square donut, or it would look like a square, but in reading what the donut was, you wouldn't know what it was saying. So the narrative expressly says we're talking about the areas around it. We would not propose for a heartbeat to do away with Ty Warner Park. I mean, it's fantastic. So one of the best parks in the region, if you. Yeah, no, we're not proposing to put a salt dome in a public works facility where Ty Warner Park
I
is.
don't think you'll make it out of here.
Yeah, I know. It wouldn't. But those are some of the areas that are big enough in an area where adjacent uses wouldn't be detrimentally impacted. I mean, there's a lot of considerations. We work very closely with Public Works Department and staff to make sure what was a viable even consideration going forward, not prioritizing one of these or another, but we had to take a look at viable options, and the area around that park provides some viable options, but not the park itself.
Is the church diagonally southeast of the existing public works. Is there talk that they would be willing to sell or something? Is that why they were included?
On 55th Street there.
Yeah, again, we had, I'd have to go back and check my notes as to the specific language as to why that was, but yes, and I don't know if there's been specific conversation with them, but when talking to Public Works and other people on the committee who have, I don't know, Shannon may know, I don't know, if there's been discussions with that church or not, or a likelihood, or I don't know.
Not to our knowledge.
Okay. I was
We
just
were looking
wondering
at
why.
area requirements and adjacency and what those land uses were, so.
Okay. No further public comment? Commissioners?
I think it's a good opportunity for the public to ask questions like Ty Warner because, and you to straighten that out immediately so that, because that will just grow and grow and grow and grow and turn into something that it's not and never was intended to be. And this is a perfect opportunity for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that came up. Chairman could call it.
I don't know if exactly fits in here.
That's really good.
I did raise my hand.
Thank you. We have a woman who wants to make a comment.
Oh, yes, please, if you
What I
would.
wonder about is you haven't mentioned anything about water retention.
If I may ask you, were you sworn in?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You haven't mentioned anything about water retention ponds. Have they been considered in this at all?
In what regard?
Well, usually when you have a business, there's usually a water retention pond behind it, like the gas station on 63rd and Williams. And, you know, they're behind different businesses, and I haven't heard anything about those. Is that going to be filled, are they going to be filled in, or is that, are they still going to be in existence, or what? Just curious.
Okay.
And then the other thing that this village hasn't been in dire need of for a long time is widening of Cass Avenue. That's never been done, and it's really sad. That's where your backup is.
If you may address, if, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but Cass Avenue is not a village street, it's a county street.
Well, so there's nothing that could have ever been done with it then, right?
We cannot unilaterally, as I believe it, widen the street.
Because that's always been authority.
It's a county function.
Oh, okay. That I didn't realize.
And if I can, I'll take a shot at addressing the detention. Detention, stormwater runoff, all of that is crucially important. A lot of that is regulated by the municipal code. And for detention and stormwater, the county has incredibly strict regulations that no matter what we put in here, wouldn't be able to supersede or even change or influence what MWRD and the county was doing for stormwater detention. So there's nothing in here that talks about vaulting or filling in or any of those things. There are real strict laws in place for what those have to be, and businesses struggle all the time, as do villages, in balancing the needs for stormwater management and providing developable sites. So this won't get into that level of detail because there are volumes of regulations that dictate that. So, okay?
What other response to your question? If you remember when the Walgreen was put up on the southeast corner of Cass and Ogden, that was underground storage put in there. I think Standard Market, didn't Standard Market
Yes.
have it also?
Must have it as well.
Yeah, Standard Market.
Walgreens actually did both.
Pardon?
Walgreens did both.
Did both what?
They have detention and underground
Okay.
vaulting.
We're not saying water reclamation is the Gestapo, but they take care of it.
They're challenging to work with.
Yes, very challenging.
So we are trying our best. All right, sir.
Okay. The next one is parks, open space, and environmental features. And some communities have a parks department, and it is run by the village or the city. Here, that is not the case. There's a parks district, its own taxing body, and they do a real nice job. They have over 20 parks, I think 23. And again, when we surveyed people and asked them throughout the process what was some of the things they liked best, parks were often noted as one of the things they liked best about this community. So the comprehensive plan in the village has little ability to overwhelmingly influence parks and recreation, but there are things that can be done. And the main thing is to continue to cooperate with the park district wherever possible as they continue to provide these things. They should continue to work with the Park District throughout to provide these amenities and efforts to acquire additional parkland on the village's south side. The Park District does have a master plan. There is an articulated need to provide some additional park space on the southern side of the village. As those proposals or ideas come forward, the village should work cooperatively with the Park District to come up with something that would work for the residents, the Park District, and the village when those things are taken into consideration. Periodically, the village should review the parkland dedication requirement as part of the municipal code, land or cash in lieu of. These are the things that as residential densities go up, it provides and makes sure that the Park District has the resources either in land or in money to provide the recreational amenities required and aspired to by the residential population. Continue to work through the existing plan review process to make sure the Park District and developers work together jointly to meet those needs. Surrounding the city, I guess one of the things the Park District has identified is the desire for a pool facility, an aquatic facility. This has been something that they've was first noted probably 33 decades ago. It's something they would like to do. The latest and greatest idea, I believe, is a 5-acre site across the street from the Ty Warner Park. Again, nothing is set in stone, but they have a master plan as well. Like this is the master plan for the village. The Park District has their own master plan, so they put a lot of thought into their next move and maintaining their properties going forward over time. The Forest Preserve districts, there's a lot of forest preserve in close proximity to the village. This is a real asset for attracting families to the community, and as an asset that can be leveraged to the community by proximity. There's also a way to get businesses to want to locate here as they try to locate businesses not only conducive to their revenue, but also in places that communities that offer the amenities their resident or their employees are looking for. So the Forest Preserve, again, we talked about organizations that are sometimes challenging and difficult to work with. The Forest Preserve District provides incredible amenities to communities. They can be a challenge. They have a very strict mission, but there are often opportunities for recreation or open space or trails that you can work out very well with the Forest Preserve District going forward. Regarding trails and bikeways, most of the trails in town, there are some off-street trails in the community. A lot of the bike routes in town are designated through signage on collector streets, not the heavy arterials or the local streets. You can continue to work for opportunities to provide off-street trails or on-street designated trails to connect the commercial, residential, and community facilities and parks and recreation going forward. We talk about the stormwater management, which goes back to the detention issue. There is a master plan, a stormwater master plan, which is something that the village should continue to work with. It was adopted, I think, last in 2011. So the recommendations primarily are to, for stormwater, continue to implement the recommendations of the stormwater master plan, encourage infiltration-based hydrology and stormwater management as opposed to more engineered structures, a more naturalized system. Through the site plan review process, work with the developers to minimize the amount of impervious surface, and then update appropriate sections of the municipal code to take a look at land development in Chapter 34, engineering and flood control, and issues related specifically to new development. So that is, in a nutshell, Chapter 10, which is environmental features, open space, and parks. But again, because that doesn't fall typically under the domain of this community, most of that is handled under the Park District and their master plan.
Any public comment on Chapter 10? Okay, we'll close the public comment. Commissioners? Oh, hearing none, let's go to Chapter 11.
All right, Chapter 11 is transportation and mobility, and I'm going to talk in a little bit more general terms here because a lot of the detail was represented in the 4 sub-area plans that Doug reviewed. That's where we really got into some specific detail about transportation and mobility. A couple of things, though, with regard to transit. We'll start with that. The metro station is a tremendous asset. The commuter parking around the station right now, I think, operates at about an 87% occupancy rate for the amount of available parking spaces. So there's a theory that if you provide more commuter parking spaces, you'll be able to accommodate more commuters on the train. Right now, the commuter parking isn't 100% saturated. A lot of communities have waiting lists for years. You're not quite there yet. In the advent that additional commuter parking is needed in the future, you really have to be careful with the identification and location and development of commuter parking, because the more you create parking fields around the station, the more you isolate that station from nearby downtown uses. And you want to have that station in line of sight and walkability and felt of as being part of that mix of downtown buildings, not isolated by a sea of parking. So right now, your commuter parking count is meeting demand, and in the future, if new parking is needed for commuters, then you need to take a look at where that parking would go and how much more you might need. One of the interesting statistics regarding the people, the ridership of the metro station, they're big numbers, but in terms of do you walk to the station, do you bike to the station, do you drive yourself to the station, do you carpool to the station, all that is pretty consistent with the entire metro system. The one anomaly was people who take the bus. Across the system, 4% of people across the system take the bus to the metro station. Here it's 14%. Take PACE to get to the metro station. That's a big number. And it should serve to tell you how important PACE is to this community and the areas adjacent to community to get people to the station, to get them to and from Chicago and other parts along the line. So transit really is more than just trains, although here we tend to think of that. PACE really serves a vital function for transportation mobility for people in this community. I thought that was an important thing just to call out real quickly. Again, I chatted about bikeways before as part of the transportation system. Most of the bikeways here is signage on collector streets. You should continue to look for opportunities to provide on-street bike lanes where appropriate and where you can do it. Sometimes there's a lot of competition for what goes in that right-of-way. That's a small piece of real estate for on-street parking, designated turn lanes, through lanes, and bike lanes. It's tough, so it's not always possible to get them in there, but take a look and re-examine where you might be able to. And then look for additional opportunities for off-street trails to connect to the off-street trails you already have. Generally speaking, walkability. Walkability is becoming increasingly important to people as they're getting back to the notion of walking to do things as opposed to getting in their car to do things. When that's compounded by traffic like you have on Cass now, the idea of walking a couple blocks is a lot better than driving a couple blocks. So walkability is especially important. It's pretty good throughout town. There are some areas where the sidewalk gaps exist or sidewalk conditions need to be improved. As new development is proposed going forward, walkability for the pedestrian needs to be increasingly reviewed and held as important throughout the community, especially the metro station and the downtown, but even for development on Ogden. You drive there in your car, that's fine, it's auto-oriented, but once you get out of your car, sites should be accommodating to the pedestrian. Standard Market has done a great job of this. The back of that with their parking, the outdoor dining, the fire pit, it's fantastic. So they accommodate a huge amount of traffic. They're on a major IDOT thoroughfare, but when you get off that site, you don't feel as though you're in a field of parking in no man's land. So walkability has to be increasingly important throughout. The other thing is functional classification system. The map identifies, and we talk about what is IDOT, what is county, what is the village. It's not surprising that when we ask people what are the most important issues facing your community, traffic-related issues are among the top important issues in every town we work in. And they're often the last issue ever addressed. And people wonder why. If it's the most important issue, why don't we do anything about it? Well, there's a couple of things. One, it's a multi-jurisdictional issue. Just because a village wants to do something about it, they often can't. It's not their jurisdiction. That's frustrating. On those rare occasions where you can just unilaterally do what you want, or IDOT happens to agree with what you want, then funding comes into play. And capital improvement projects are not cheap. So they take years and years of planning and cost millions and millions of dollars. So when transportation issues are identified as most important, they're often very difficult to take care of. But that sort of underscores the need to get in front of them as opposed to underscoring the approach of just forgetting about them. You need to get in front of them further. You need to get in front of them further in advance. You need to get in front of them with a harder stance and conviction, and you need to get in front of the jurisdiction that has control over that roadway. On Cass Avenue right now, there are 7 traffic signals that are under the jurisdiction of the village. They're the only traffic signals that are under the jurisdiction of the village, and they're all on Cass. Some of them are timed, some of them are not. I had a discussion just earlier with somebody in the audience about the sequencing of lights on Cass. Can we re-examine that to see if they're sequenced and under the control of the village to move traffic more safely but more efficiently through the village? So that functional classification system and traffic is a very important thing. If you look at page 137, there's a transportation plan. It is the third from the back right there, that third easel. It identifies on there the things I just talked about. The other thing that I'm going to mention real quickly is access consolidation or access management. In some states, comprehensive plans are required to have an access management component. It's not required in the state of Illinois, but it's essential for any corridor. On any corridor, whether it's an IDOT corridor or a county corridor or a municipal corridor, sometimes you have a piece of property that has 4 driveways when it could have 1. Sometimes you have a gas station that has 1 driveway, but it's 114 feet wide. You know, a roll curb for the full frontage. You don't need that. You don't. It doesn't help with on-site circulation. And some communities are even going so far as to see if they can give incentives for a property to remove and eliminate entirely its curb cut or driveway if there's convenient access and having one with a neighboring commercial property next to it. So through redevelopment, look at access consolidation, look at the removal of unnecessary or repetitive driveways, and at the same time you're doing that, increase the number of cross-access of adjacent parking lots. Sometimes you'll have a parking lot for one use and a parking lot for another use right next to it, and there's a 6-inch curb in between the two when you ought to be able to just drive over the other parking lot. It forces you to go out onto the busy street, take a right or a left, go over 100 feet, and then go back in. And sometimes those cross-accesses are super easy to do. Businesses like them sometimes, but historically that's not how development was done. They were all isolated pockets. So decrease curb cuts, increase access management, and increase the number of cross-adjacent curb cuts or access points between adjacent parking lots. These recommendations and more are contained on that graphic and are contained in Chapter 11 of the Comprehensive Plan. It does talk about downtown parking and commuter parking. I talked about commuter parking. It references the study from before about the downtown parking. Downtown parking, what's the old saying? Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. That's kind of true with parking. The reason it's crowded is because everybody goes there. If you go to Evanston, ran into this. Downtown Evanston is fairly successful. You want parking to be full, but you want people who go there to be able to find parking. Because if they can never find parking, they won't go there. But somebody's going there if the parking lots are all full. So it's a balancing act. The trick with parking in the downtown is there has to be enough of it. It has to be easily accessible. Driving down Cass, you need to have signage that says where the parking is. You need to be able to get to it very easily. But it cannot dominate the downtown landscape. You can't have large surface parking lots on Cass Avenue because then you're not going to have a downtown. So you want to create a pedestrian environment. Pedestrian environments traditionally are buildings at or near the sidewalk. You can walk from one to the other. You park conveniently, but it doesn't mean you put in a ton of parking. And while there is technically, by that study, the parking demand is met, the key to parking in a downtown is not the number of parking spaces, but where they're located, and can you find them? Because you could have a big parking lot that meets your need, and if it's a block and a half away from the use you're going, you're not going to go there, and as far as you're concerned, there's not enough parking. So it's about smaller lots, more evenly distributed, not big, huge lots in one place, and making sure that the wayfinding to get people to them is sufficient so it's easy. If it's not conveniently located, if it's not easily gotten to, then the perception is there's not enough of it, when that might not be the case. That's some of what's going on in your downtown. So with that, that's the transportation section, and Mr. Chairman, I'll open it up to any questions.
Okay, will the public comment on Chapter 11 at all? Please, if you would, the home audience cannot hear you unless you're at the podium.
I just have a question. I wanted an explanation for what a collector street is.
Sure, good question. Streets have a hierarchy. There are highways, which we've got here, the blue line, you can see it over there. Next to highways, there are arterials. Below arterials are collectors. Below collectors, there are local streets. Let me sort of walk you through this. A local street is like a residential neighborhood. Every house has at least, every property has a curb cut. So every 50 feet or 70 feet, there's a driveway. That's a lot of breaks in the roadway. It's a local street. So direct access to every single parcel, and the parcels are small, like a residential neighborhood. Residential or local streets tend to collect into more major streets. Still not the Casses or the Ogdens, but the other streets that run more east, west, and north, south that collect all those little bitty neighborhood streets. That's a collector street. So the neighborhoods filter onto those. They're still neighborhood type streets, but they're a little bit bigger. Sometimes they're the streets that run, not that the house is front and facing with the driveways, but they're the streets that run in the other direction that are the sides of the houses that run along the blocks. So fewer curb cuts, fewer direct driveways, higher rates of speed, a little bit wider streets. Those funnel into arterials. So local streets funnel into collector streets. Collector streets funnel into arterials, Cass, Ogden. Arterial streets funnel into the highway system, like at Ogden. So all streets in every community across the United States have a hierarchy. And that hierarchy isn't just by description, but it goes to access management. At the neighborhood level, a local street, no access management. Maybe your access management is you get one driveway per house. But a lot of communities allow the U-shaped driveway. But when you start getting up into arterials and collector streets, we did what I just said. You control access. You minimize the driveways coming in and out. Imagine if every 50 feet on Ogden there was a driveway, like in your neighborhood. Ogden would cease to function. IDOT has very strict requirements as to how often you can have an intersecting street or a traffic light or a driveway, because the mission is to move traffic. So as the hierarchy changes, access, curb cuts, and management of those streets changes. But that's what a collector street is. It bridges the gap between your neighborhood and streets like Cass.
Thank you. No commissioners have anything on Chapter 11, so let's do Chapter 12.
Okay, everybody take a deep breath, we're there.
Chair, we have a question.
It's Rob Sanoa. I guess I just wanted to reiterate.
Excuse me if I may. Were you sworn in?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to reiterate his point about the traffic lights and I guess Westmont having coverage of all of them on Cass in the downtown area. One suggestion I thought of was that I'd put online, but in terms of allowing north-south to flow would be to avoid left-hand turns onto Burlington during rush hour to obviously focus on the north-south traffic, before and after trains leave and depart. And I don't know, what kind of studies have been done in terms of, phasing the lights so they, do something like that when the gates come back up. But it seems like we allow left turn lanes or a couple of cars in the left turn lane to inhibit north-south traffic flow. And if we disallowed left turns during rush hour like we do on side streets as far as right turns and that type of thing, if we could do that during rush hours or other times during the day at lunch hour, I would think you would get more north-south traffic flow and also be able to predict that you're going to actually get down Cass Avenue in a reasonable amount of time, because that's in other towns that I've been in, you don't mind going downtown because you're going to get through the light or get across the tracks or get through downtown. Here, and depending on the time of day, you could sit there 10 minutes and not move. And it seems like there's no reason to really need to have left turns, because those are what we're talking about, the side streets that don't get much traffic. So why not focus on moving the key traffic through so businesses in downtown can benefit by getting traffic that actually can see their storefronts rather than taking side streets to avoid downtown, and then now you're missing out on opportunity of sales because of traffic going down alleys, side streets, and so forth. So I don't know what kind of plan there is in terms of implementation of traffic congestion, but obviously that's a separate issue from this. But as other things to look at, it seems like that's something easy and affordable that can be implemented rather simply and quickly to try and establish that.
Cass Avenue northbound at the train station has a turn lane, a left turn lane. The very time of day when the congestion occurs is the very time of day when commuter pickup takes place. So it'd be pretty tough to close that left turn to the commuter station at the very time. It's also the very time that's going to back things up.
Right, but that's the northbound is everybody's going northbound in the morning, so you don't really need to turn left across the tracks. I mean, before the tracks you can, but across the tracks, it seems like you're delaying the north-south traffic just to turn in front of cars that, you could go straight and turn the next block or something like that. So it seems like there's alternatives there, just an idea.
Would you care to? No? Okay, no further comments on Chapter 11. We'll do to Chapter 12.
Okay. Chapter 12 is the last chapter. And like I said, Chapter 12 is implementation. And all this is for naught if this community isn't prepared to do this stuff or start working on it. These are not quick fixes, a lot of them. This is a long-term plan. It's meant to be implemented out over years. And implementation is key. In the implementation chapter, we try to give the city, or the village, excuse me, the tools to begin to create a foundation or infrastructure for implementation within the organizational structure of the village. So let me just go through very quickly what is contained in Chapter 12. We identified several different categories of types of implementation things and describe how you do these things. You need to adopt and use the plan on a day-to-day basis. And that's different for staff, this commission, elected officials, as a marketing tool. There are a number of ways to use it. It shouldn't be something you dust off. We have a lot of communities that will call up and say, can you print off 20 more copies? Ours are worn out. And that's what we want to hear. Use this thing. So we have a section on how to adopt it and get it used on a day-to-day basis. You need to use it to review the zoning ordinance. Like I said, zoning is not planning. Too many communities think it is. Too many communities will look at a downtown and say, you know, we always wanted to have this or this or this in our downtown, but, you know, can't have it. Our zoning won't let us. Never thought of changing the zoning so you can get what you want. Zoning isn't planning. It's a tool for planning. With the adoption of this, you have your plan. Go back and re-examine your zoning to say, what is our zoning preventing us from getting that we now say we want? And if your zoning is hindering getting this done, then change your zoning ordinance. It's not always easy. Sometimes it is. And you can be pretty aggressive about it if you want to be. But sometimes your zoning is not getting what you want. It's preventing you from getting what you want. You need to examine your zoning for mixed use, for spot zoning, and for code enforcement particularly. Capital improvement plan, CIP. There's a lot of things in here that are going to take years to do. Get in front of it now. The funding is going to take a while. Maybe you need to partner with another agency or organization to get the funding in place and get the task accomplished. Use this and an action agenda for capital improvements to start doing your CIP 3 and 5 years out. But start identifying in here what is a CIP eligible task. Get it in your CIP so it doesn't fall off your radar screen. A lot of these things are actionable as an administrative item. A lot of these things are actionable as a code enforcement item. A lot of these things are actionable as a regulatory item like zoning. And a lot of these things are actionable as a CIP component, a physical thing that has to be done. So identify what those are. Regular updates, update these things every year. Shannon or whoever can help you do this needs to work with you on a regular basis. This is what we accomplished this last year. Here's what yet to be done. Everybody's talking about doing this. We haven't had the resources started yet. This next year, we're going to start doing this. These are things that have come up as being problematic. We might want to amend this section of the plan because it isn't working out the way we want or conditions have changed. But staff should be charged with working with this group to make sure that the plan is updated. Comprehensive plan is not static. Market conditions are crazy. They vary all the time. This plan needs to be dynamic enough to accommodate that while be consistent in character and true to what it says. But there may need to be some amendments. Keep an eye on it on a regular basis. Public communication. Residents should know what's in here as much as you know what's in here. Put it online. Put a copy at the library. Have copies here. You can get this thing out in a number of different ways. I was talking with a gentleman beforehand that said, you know, you might want to take this 180 pages and boil it down to the most relevant 10 and circulate that as sort of a cliff note of the comprehensive plan. Communities do that. Or they'll do a poster plan. We have the land use plan and transportation composite on one side. On the other side, all the goals and objectives. People can come pick it up. You can hand it out. But popularize it, get it out there to the public. They should be communicated, know what it is. Identify who you want to cooperate with, and understand the financing tools to help get these things paid for. So we talk about all these. With regard to the financing tools, a gentleman talked before about a couple of different times as to the financing that might be available in grant writing for specific types of projects. The last section of this plan, we talk about funding sources, those ways to help the village pay for the things we say you should do. And we identified several different things that you ought to go out. There's no guarantee that these are available, that you'll get this funding, but we identified the best places to pursue funding. And let me go through these just to read them off so you can hear what we're talking about. And we're not advocating any one of these, but this is the toolbox, if you will. tax increment financing, and for each one of these, we talk about what it is, we define it, what it's applicable for, and what you might be able to use it for to get done. Tax increment financing, business development districts, and again, these are several pages, special service areas, sales tax rebates, tax abatements, facade improvement programs, business assistant programs, commercial loan/gap financing programs, restaurant assistance programs, commercial site improvement grants, and then transportation-specific ones and infrastructure, safe routes to school funding, IDOT enhancement programs, which is called ITEP, congestion mitigation and air quality improvement programs, CMAQ. And again, some of these are for pollution, some are for transportation, some are for pedestrians, some are for vehicles. Surface Transportation Program, SSP, Green Infrastructure Funding, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Recreational Trails Program, RTP. These are just some of the things that we say, here's what this funding is specifically for. Here's what you can use it for. Here's the funding you ought to go after to try to help get these things paid for. So the whole last chapter of the plan identifies all those funding options to pursue. So with that, that's the last chapter. It's chapter 12. It tends to lay the foundation for how the village can move forward once the plan is adopted and get things actually implemented and underway. So that's the last chapter.
Okay, thank you. Will anybody from the public speak on this last chapter? Okay, we're going to close the public comment. Staff, commissioners. Okay,
I have.
Please.
one thing. Both Ed and I think, were present when we, or part of this commission when we did the 1998 comprehensive plan. And the problem is that I think it stayed on the shelf too much, and we didn't follow it as close. There were a lot of good ideas on there. For example, the corridor, along the Burlington, we saw all the other communities develop. We didn't. By the time we got around to it, the economy tanked, and of course you see what the result has been. But anyway, hopefully after this is adopted, we can really use this as a good planning tool, and I'm just hopeful that this will be the case.
I would ask council to delineate the options open to this board this evening then.
Sure. From a timing perspective, the village board is obligated to vote on the comprehensive plan within 90 days after the public hearing's closed. And you guys are charged with making a recommendation within 90 days from when this is first submitted to you, which could have been the date an ordinance was passed, I believe, in December. Well, I know you physically got it in your hands, but the board passed an ordinance in December saying we're charging the Planning and Zoning Commission with holding a public hearing and considering the comprehensive plan. That would start the clock ticking on your 90-day time limit. So there's enough time then for the board to make their vote within 90 days. What I'm trying to say is you have a somewhat short time period to consider this and recommend it. If you fail to make a recommendation within 90 days after submission, it goes straight up to the village board and they can consider it without your recommendation. I know you whispered to me, what are your options as far as either voting on this tonight or can you vote on parts of it, et cetera? My recommendation is if you are not comfortable with this document and have concerns that you want fleshed out, you certainly can continue the public hearing to another date, hear more testimony and comments, and if you have specific concerns, tell the consultant and staff now and ask for changes to be made. Alternatively, and I think to move this along, certainly this can get changed at the village board level. So in addition to recommending this, you can have side motions, separate motions for specific recommendations you would like the village board to consider adding to this or taking away from this. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Upon hearing that, we could approve the plan as submitted to us tonight. We could also generate motions of recommendation to the village board to fine tune it as we see fit. And I think since the time is running out on us, since we're starting from December, whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's running out, but I think you don't want to put the village board in a trick bag where they've got, by the time it gets to them,
Yeah.
they only have one meeting to consider
No,
this.
no. So I think it would be a good idea is if we vote on this tonight, and then if any board members feel like something has to be fine-tuned, like I have one or two thoughts.
Sure.
Sound okay?
Yeah, let's give it to them.
Oh, good.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to recommend approval to the Board of Trustees, the 2012 Comprehensive Plan as submitted to us.
So move.
Second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Thomas, seconded by Commissioner Anton. I heard you first. Question on the motion. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Pill?
Yes.
Commissioner Anton?
Yes.
Commissioner Fidesco?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Buren votes yes, and Chairman Richard?
Yes. Okay, as to specifics on the plan, the one thing I have trouble with is the density along Burlington and Quincy as to the plan goes for single, townhomes, 1-2-story type structures. We have zoned it, Burlington and Quincy, east and west of Cass, for high density, 3-story buildings, et cetera, condos. I think we should retain that zoning.
And I would point out that the recommendation for attached single-family townhomes, et cetera, can still be accommodated within the current zoning. I'm not saying one way or the other about your recommendation, but the zoning is in place to accommodate that. It's just a matter of whether you want a recommendation of this commission to push for more
Well, let me,
multi-unit condos, for example, higher density.
well, we're zoned for that right now. But this comprehensive plan is recommending that.
He's saying you're recommending a down zone.
The comprehensive plan is recommending we downzone Burlington and Quincy.
We'll just
So
don't-
less density, as I see it.
I was chiming in. I don't want to jump in, but
The tell me if I'm wrong here. The plan.
You are.
The comprehensive. Well, you're generally right when you do that.
Fine.
Never give them that opportunity, never. The comprehensive plan is not high density, but the zoning is high density, correct?
Yes.
So if we let everything the way it is, both can function, right? Then why change it?
Because we still control it when it comes up.
Yeah.
that's accurate. That's an accurate statement.
It's not a zoning tool.
It's not a zoning tool, and this is not zoning. If a developer were to come forward and the village did not change that zoning, he would be bound by the regulations in that zoning district. And there are other things other than just attached or detached or multifamily that describe the character of that area. He can say, I'm proposing a condominium as opposed to a row house. A row house would probably be about 8 units per acre, maybe 10, depending on the design of the row house. Condominiums could be a little bit more than that. But the zoning wouldn't preclude him from coming in. If the zoning doesn't change, he's bound by legality of what the zoning district allows him to do. This plan will not prevent that from happening. If the village board took it upon themselves to rezone that property out from underneath the owners, then any development would be subject to whatever the new zoning was. But this doesn't change that. This use is accommodated under the existing zoning.
That being said, if I understand your concern, even with the zoning in place, you're still not comfortable with the recommendation for less dense development.
Correct.
So
And-
I guess that's something the commission.
And what that would entail, then, if I'm reading it correctly, would be changing that area from the light tan color, which is single-family attached, to the darker brown color, which is multifamily. No specific densities are articulated. It just talks about the character of development being apartments or condominiums as opposed to row homes. That's it. It's a very, very, very simple thing to do, and really have no material big overall difference to the plan, so.
I'll go along with him because I want to make him mad. He gets really angry.
Have been some concerns, at least at the board level, about, the number of apartments in town, the potential for larger condo developments to be rented out. I know that can be controlled somewhat. Concerned about stormwater management issues with larger developments in this area with a tax system already. So there may be some trend towards less dense development, but again, it's up to this commission. It's you're recommending. But
One of the other factors is that there's not a lot of lot depth in that area. We've had to be very creative with some projects in terms of working with acquiring right-of-way and things to make them work. So the row home character is something that has typically worked within those constraints as well.
And I would like to make a comment in that we already have several row homes built in that area. And to kind of, well, I understand what the zoning is right now, but we already have several row homes there, and they look nice. And I'm a proponent of keeping that trend going. And if a recommendation, as it is in the plan, is to make it the row homes, I'm more in favor of that than going down that high density. I was not in favor of high density before, and I'm even more leaning towards going with the row home recommendation than the high density in those areas. Unless it's a planned development, like maybe in a, let's call it a greenfield, let's call it the Public Works facility, and maybe that gets changed. Maybe that becomes a higher density parcel versus the ones that are currently along the tracks on both sides. And there are existing single-family homes behind them, behind the alley, and why not go with that?
Well, one of the key to downtown development is to have population downtown. And in some ways, I would agree with that higher density along the corridor, the Burlington corridor, would allow for a greater population downtown, would give more reason for a grocery store to be there, for a lot of the services that would want to fill those vacancies that go up and down Cass. So that's a thought.
Well, that was my thought, Wally. John, a question. If we adopt the comprehensive plan, or we recommend adoption of it, the village adopts it, our zoning law is in conflict of it. Can somebody use that as a leverage that we did not follow the comprehensive plan with our zoning?
No, not really. I mean, the comprehensive plan, as you said, is a guide to your community. And there will definitely be instances of conflict with the zoning ordinance. And it's not always going to be compatible. To the extent you identify areas where you want the zoning to change, you should do so.
Okay.
But no, I've seen people in court, for example, on zoning issues, wave the comprehensive plan around, and the judges routinely dismiss that argument.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Thomas?
Now, we have, in place now, we have the opportunity to go both ways. You got to have the zoning covers both.
Correct.
And you're not limited for the future, So you have both opportunities, and when the individual projects come up, they have to come to us, and we deal with them then, and as what we want and what the trustees want. And I just don't think that we should be limiting ourselves for in the future. We can deal with that when it comes, and the economics will be what they are at the time, or whatever, So I don't know that we should be limiting our possibilities. That's all I'm saying.
You smooth talking devil.
Yeah, thank you. You told me to be
Go to
quiet.
strong arm us as usual, so.
Okay. That's all I have to say. Anything further? I would like to compliment you I think this is a magnificent document. You and all of the committee members that have worked so diligently on this, you're to be congratulated, all of you.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. So I know your staff and the steering committee worked very hard on it.
It's been a pleasure working with Houseo Levine as well.
All right, no further business to come before the board. We recommend approval. Yes, John?
The agenda item 13-001, I know was withdrawn. I don't know, do we get a statement on the record to that effect?
I never
Yeah.
even had notice of it.
Well, it's on the agenda.
Right.
And then there was a note with the agenda that
Right.
that agenda item was withdrawn by the applicant.
Right, we,
So I guess I just wanted to read into the record that it was withdrawn, no votes required by this commission, but that's why it was not considered tonight.
Right.
And I should have announced that at the beginning of the meeting. Apologize for that.
It's the chairman's fault.
Any further comments?
I have an unrelated comment before we close the meeting.
Please.
Sure. It's with great pleasure that I am going to present service recognition letters to two of our planning and zoning commissioners. This evening, we have one for Wally Van Buren, who has been on the commission for 40 years, and Ed Richard, our chair, who's been on the commission for 30 years. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to present.
I always knew Wally was older than I.
Older than everybody.
How old is Bill?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pill, seconded by Commissioner Anton. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.